Hello and welcome to this edition of Robb's Review, The Bottom Line. I'm Fulton County Commissioner Robb Pitts. Today's show will focus on actions taken by the Georgia General Assembly this session. I promised you in February that after the adjournment of the General Assembly that I would come back and review the bills that passed or failed during the session, including two bills that were of particular interest to Fulton County. One being the increase in the homestead exemption from $30,000 to $60,000, and the other being the recreation of Milton County. Finally, we will discuss the 2014 legislation that is of interest to Fulton County, which the Fulton County Board of Commissioners sent over to the General Assembly for consideration. To let you know how the county fared in this year's session, my guest today is Christopher Boyd, the Grants Procurement Officer in our Finance Department. Chris tracks legislation that is of interest to Fulton County at the General Assembly for the Board of Commissioners, and today he will review with me some of the 2013-24 legislation that I mentioned earlier and talk about what it all means for you as a Fulton County resident when we return to Robb's Review, The Bottom Line. Welcome back to Robb's Review, The Bottom Line. Today on my show we have Chris Boyd from the Finance Department to talk about what bills passed and what bills failed during this past session of the Georgia General Assembly. Chris, welcome back and thank you for being with us again. Now, when you were here in February, I invited you back and I want to review how we fared this year. Number of bills. You're our expert, so I'm going to do very little talking. It's your show instead of mine. Let's start with Medicaid.
Thank you, Commissioner, for having me again. Medicaid, as you know, the state of Georgia has not chosen to expand Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act. We've got 650,000 Georgians who could benefit from the expansion of Medicaid, but the state has chosen not to do so.
How would they benefit?
Well, they make so little money that they don't get insurance through their jobs, or they don't qualify now for Medicaid under the current program. And this would expand Medicaid up to 138% of the federal poverty level, allowing these people to get health insurance for perhaps the first time. They would be able to get out of our emergency rooms. They would be able to go to primary care doctors and get screenings, get care earlier before they come down with an emergency medical situation. It would save the taxpayers in the end a lot to get them out of the emergency rooms, which is pretty much the most expensive type of health care there is. So that's how they would benefit. But so far, the state of Georgia has chosen not to do so. It's optional under the Affordable Care Act due to the rulings of the Supreme Court. And this year in the legislative session, they made it a little bit more difficult to expand Medicaid. At the beginning of the session, the power to expand Medicaid rested with the governor. And he could negotiate with the federal government to make some changes like we've seen in other states like Arkansas or Arizona, where they've used it to do a private public mix of insurance provisions for those persons who are under the expanded Medicaid. As it is now, with this bill that passed, he will not be able to expand Medicaid under his own authority. He'll need approval of the General Assembly to do so. Okay. So it adds another legislative hurdle if at some point, hopefully, the state of Georgia would change its mind and proceed to expand Medicaid.
Now, if I followed this bill correctly, it became very partisan.
Yes, sir, it certainly did. Most of the Democratic Party was advocating and continues to advocate for the expansion of Medicaid, something this Board of Commissioners has advocated for because we know how many people it will help. And so it's certainly something that the Republican majority seems to resist and has made a little bit more difficult. There was also another bill that is targeting the state officers and all of the cities and counties in the state of Georgia that makes it harder for us to help our constituents get health insurance under the Affordable Care Act. We currently have been having health information sessions with the libraries, working with the extension services from the University of Georgia, getting the word out to the people before the March 31st deadline of how to get signed up for health care for those people.
And by the way, on that deadline, that's been extended?
It depends on the state, but mostly what's going on is if you try to sign up by March 31st and you've put in your name in the system, and then there's a problem, you will have an extended amount of time in order to still get signed up, I believe until the middle of April. So as there's a last minute crush of people trying to sign up by the deadline, if the website hangs up, if there's a problem, you'll be able to still get going forward just after that deadline, as long as you tried to start.
As long as you can prove that you started the process before March 31st.
That's correct.
You're okay.
That's correct.
All right. Gun legislation.
Gun legislation, this is a really big bill that came out of the General Assembly. It really reforms a lot of areas where you can now carry a concealed weapon into a public place. You can carry it into a bar.
I mean, legally.
Legally, if you have a legal concealed weapons permit.
You've heard me say this before. I have a permit.
Oh, yes, sir. But you can now carry that into a bar. You can carry it into government facilities. You can carry it into an airport, in the non-secure areas. If you come up to the TSA screening checkpoints and you've got a gun in a bag and you forgot it was in there, you would not be arrested after they clear you if you take that gun immediately and leave and take it back to your car, take it back to your home. Right now, current law is that you could be charged with a misdemeanor crime for trying to take a gun into an airport secure area.
All right, what about churches and schools?
Churches are now opt-in. So a church...
What does that mean?
The church would have to make an affirmative action to allow you to bring a weapon into the church.
So XYZ, let's say Baptist Church, they say, okay, we're going to allow it.
They would have to let you know that it's allowed, and then you could bring your weapon into the church.
So they would just let the congregation know that, okay, it's okay to bring your gun.
Yes, and then they would also probably need to put something on the signage of their church in the front doors to let people know that weapons were permitted in the church. However, if you do bring a gun into a church where it's not permitted, it's only a $100 fine.
Okay.
So it's not a misdemeanor crime anymore. It's only a $100 fine. People can bring weapons into government buildings that are not screened or restricted. So they can bring weapons into our libraries, into our senior centers, and to other places. And they can bring them...
As long as they have a legal permit.
As long as they have a legal permit, that's correct. However, law enforcement is also not permitted any longer to stop a person for solely the purpose of determining whether or not someone has a legal license permit. So if a police officer is in one of our libraries and they see someone with a gun, they cannot stop that person and detain him for the purpose of determining, or her,
okay.
or for the purpose of determining whether or not that weapon is legally licensed.
And what about schools?
In schools,
I guess universities, not high schools.
Universities were not included in the bill, so students will not be allowed to carry weapons on campuses. However, parents who are dropping kids off at schools, who are picking kids up from and taking them to the bus or different school functions, will be able to continue to carry their weapons onto the school property as they're doing those activities, as long as they're legally licensed.
Okay. Cannabis oil, or what's it called? The common term is not the medical marijuana.
Well, it's not true medical marijuana here in the state of Georgia. They were not contemplating smoking marijuana for the purposes of treating medical symptoms. What they were contemplating was expanding so that a medical cannabis oil extract, something that seems to be very effective in treating people with seizure disorders, including young children with seizure disorders, would be able to use that medical oil or that medical cannabis oil legally here in the state of Georgia. Unfortunately, that bill died on the Senate floor at the very end of the session. I was shocked about that, because it seems as if the momentum was going in the direction of it passing with the parents, and the kids and all of the stuff that you saw on TV about it, and then you wake up and it did not pass. So what happened? It got tied together with an autism bill that would require insurance companies to provide treatment for children with autism for both screenings and treatments up to age 6.
Is that bad? I mean,
I think it's very good, but it certainly adds costs to insurance companies. And so I'm sure they were concerned about that. And by tying the two efforts together, it suddenly became just a harder bill to push forward all the way through. And it got tied together in the very last days of the session. So there was a very limited amount of time to get it passed by both houses. It got changed over in the Senate, so it not only had to get past the Senate, but then get back to the House for them to agree to the changes. So it became very confusing in the last days of the session and ultimately died.
So is there any consideration at this time of a special session, if you will, to deal with that particular bill, since there was so much public interest in it?
There has not been any consideration of special sessions yet. The governor is looking at whether or not he can do any type of executive order, since this basically deals with the discretion to prosecute people for using cannabis oil. Does he have any authority to try and make it so that our district attorneys won't prosecute people for using this cannabis oil?
That was so disappointing to a lot of people.
Yes, sir.
Okay, the CIDs.
Well, there was
First of all, let's explain what a CID is.
A CID is a community improvement district, and it's a group of businesses that come together and want to create a self-taxing district.
Tax themselves.
Tax themselves for for the purposes of public works improvements and other improvements in their area to make their business areas better. We have several within Fulton County, including one out in Fulton Industrial Boulevard. There's a South Fulton Oakley. There's a North Fulton CID. We have several within the area that are working to make their business areas better areas for the community.
You know, we took a position on that bill.
Well, this bill, what it does is it changes who gets to certify a CID. Currently, you have to come together as a contiguous area, and you have to have certain levels of property owners approving of the CID, a certain number of property owners, and that fell to the tax commissioner to make that certification. This bill changes it mid-year from the tax commissioner over to the tax assessor. Yeah. It's going to cost us extra money to make that change, as well as it becomes a non-elected official approving a self-taxing
We're going to have to take a break now because that was a personal, but we probably need to talk a little bit more about that one. When we return, we will talk more with Chris Boyd about the legislation that passed or failed during this past session of the Georgia General Assembly. Please stay tuned. Welcome back to Robb's Review, The Bottom Line. We're talking with Chris Boyd of our Fulton County Finance Department about legislation over at the Gold Dome and how it impacted Fulton County. Chris, let's continue talking. Let's go to the MARTA legislation, which is obviously important to residents of Fulton County.
Certainly. The MARTA legislation did a number of changes. So at first, it's going to give relief to the 50-50 split. This is where MARTA is obligated to use 50% of its tax revenues for capital improvements and 50% for operations.
And we supported that, right?
That's correct.
And that's a good thing for MARTA.
That's a good thing for MARTA. They're going to have increased flexibility for the next 3 years. If they need to move funds from the capital projects over to operations, they'll have that flexibility to go ahead and do so. Another good thing that happened on the MARTA bills is they're expanding the ability for Clayton County to enact the MARTA penny. Clayton County, a couple of years ago during the tough parts of the recession, had to cancel its bus service, its independent bus service. So if they make the choice through a referendum of enacting the MARTA penny sales tax, they'll be able to join MARTA and have a dedicated tax to finance bus service out in Clayton County. So that's a very good thing as well.
For Clayton County in particular.
Clayton County.
Right.
For Clayton County and for MARTA as a whole.
Okay.
However, one of the other parts of the bill is going to change how the MARTA board is appointed. The MARTA board appointments are up here at the end of the year, and Fulton County will be able to make its 3 MARTA board appointments for just a 2-year term instead of a 4-year term. And then starting in January of 2017, actually a month or so before that as the appointments are made, the MARTA board appointments from North Fulton County will be made by a caucus of North Fulton mayors. And then
So that's taken away from the Board of Commissioners.
That's correct. It'll be taken away from the Board of Commissioners. And then, but the Board of Commissioners will continue to make an appointment for the South Fulton person who's on the MARTA board, and that will continue.
So there's 1 up South County and
2 north.
2 north. Both of those, though, will be appointed by, well, not even recommended, just appointed by a what's the term?
A caucus of the North Fulton mayors.
So they'll have to agree upon those 2.
That's correct.
And that's a sort of a significant change for MARTA.
That's a significant change and a significant change in who makes the appointments. And then on top of that, they're going to do some things to stagger terms so that they don't get a complete changeover in the MARTA board every 4 years. It'll be changing every 2 years.
Okay. Municipal voting, early voting, advanced voting.
Municipal early voting, this was a bill that came out of the House that originally wanted to take municipal early voting just for cities in the odd number of years and reduce it from 3 weeks down to 1 week. There were some changes in the bill that would have allowed it to stay at a default of 3 weeks and then just let local communities who were struggling with having the cost of having a 3-week early election get a local act that would allow them to reduce down to 1 week. There were a lot of changes in the bill going back and forth late on the last day, and it died. It was voted on in the Senate, but when they got it back over to the House, they didn't proceed to vote on it again with the changes that the Senate made, and so it died. They may come back to it next year because there's no straight-up city elections this year in an even numbered year. These always happen pretty much on odd numbered years, so they have a chance to potentially look at this again.
So why was the focus on cities and not cities and counties?
In part because the county elections also happen at the same time with the federal elections. They're a much bigger base of people come out to vote than they do in the city elections in the odd numbered years. And so that was their main rationale, was that this was a cost savings measure for especially small cities that really don't have a large number of voters.
Okay. The increase in the homestead exemption from 30,000 to 60,000, which would have been really devastating for Fulton County.
It would have been devastating, and very thankfully that died. It requires a 2/3 vote. And so they never got there, at least in the Senate, and that's where it died. It would have cost the county $60 million a year by the time it was fully implemented. So we would have had a significant cut in the types of services that we provide, or we'd have to consider potentially raising taxes to cover it, which would fall heavily on businesses and other non-homestead properties. Okay. So it would have really damaged economic development.
We need to make this point, though, that even though some bills fail this year, they can be reintroduced next year for another 2-year cycle. Is that correct?
That's correct. Starting in January of 2015 starts another 2-year cycle. So they can bring this bill back if they wish to and try to move forward again. Like I said, the homestead exemption bill requires a 2/3 vote, but other bills are just a simple majority.
Okay. The recreation of Milton County.
Another one, thankfully, that died. This was a constitutional amendment, again needing a 2/3 vote. That would have allowed more than 159 counties in Georgia, and it would have allowed them to take North Fulton and make it into Milton County. It also would have potentially made the ability for South Fulton to become Campbell County. This bill never got a vote in either the House or Senate, again because it takes a 2/3 vote, and there's a lot of people who say we've got enough counties. Yeah. 159 counties is more than enough in the state of Georgia.
Okay. But we didn't mention libraries. I know there was some talk about libraries. Was there anything?
It never got introduced. There was some discussion about what is the composition of our Board of Trustees for the library, what is the level of participation for the city of Atlanta, since the county operates it. But that bill never got introduced.
Okay, and really one that I guess captivated the public. There were any number of issues, 2 or 3 regarding the tax commissioner for Fulton County?
The tax commissioner, there was two major issues. One was a fee that he collects, a 50-cent fee that he collects when he sells a tax lien to a third party. That bill died, and so he will continue to be legally able to collect that fee.
I mean, it was legal before.
It was legal before,
Yeah.
from decades or maybe even a century ago, when tax commissioners were paid under a fee schedule rather than a salary schedule. And so it's still a part of the law that he is able to legally collect.
Now that can be reintroduced next year.
That's
but for
correct.
this year, it's gone.
Yeah, but for this year it's gone, so it won't be till January of next year. And then there was also a bill to make him an appointed position. Now, this was something the Board of Commissioners opposed. It's based on what used to be done called a local constitutional amendment, so it really only affects Fulton County. And it would make Fulton County's tax commissioner the only appointed position, appointed tax commissioner in the state. Every other tax commissioner would be elected. And so it would really take the power of electing a tax commissioner away from the residents of Fulton County, and therefore the Board of Commissioners opposed it, and it died.
Yeah. So one way to state that then is that the tax commissioner won on both issues so far.
So far, he has pretty much.
Yeah. Okay. We're getting short on time. The city of South Fulton. A lot of talk about that one.
There was a lot of talk about it this year's session. We had a lot of community meetings. A lot of people in South Fulton were very interested in it, but the bill did not pass the Senate during the session. And so it's dead for the year. There will not be a vote this November. There will not be a vote on to create a new city.
What happened? Because the momentum seemed to be moving, first of all, towards a May 20th vote, and then it was amended, I believe, to require a vote in November 4th.
That's correct. And I think one of the significant problems is there was a companion bill that was meant to always go with it. The companion bill that we have a Fulton Industrial District out on Fulton Industrial Boulevard that is protected from being annexed or incorporated. And it's got a lot of revenue that's generated for a potential new city. And that bill had some difficulties. It may not have been properly construed, and it died on crossover day. And once it did, that just made a significant issue with how to properly fix this bill. They had to take it out in the Senate version. They had changed the election date to November, and in getting it fixed, it was right up against the very end of the session. So there were certainly a lot of other priorities the Republican majority was trying to get through, and they simply never got to it. I imagine it will try to come back next year, but there will be no vote this year in November.
There's quite a bit of discussion about annexation since it failed. Is that?
Annexations can still go forward,
Okay.
But it takes the people wanting to be annexed. There's the 60% method, or there's the 100% method. 60% is more for neighborhoods.
Okay.
100%
Got
is
it.
more for big,
All right, Chris,
big offices.
we're out of time.
All right.
Thank you. Did a great job. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
When we return, the bottom line, and I'll be right back. Welcome back to Robb's Review, The Bottom Line. I hope that this show has been helpful in bringing you up to date on the various bills that impacted Fulton County. Whether you agree or not with the bills that were passed or failed by the General Assembly, there's no doubt that what happened under the Gold Dome directly affects you, your family, your community, and your finances. Until next time, this is Robb's Review, The Bottom Line.